Don't make a scene, sweetheart. The twins need stability. They can't have their aunt screaming on the front steps. My mother stood in the doorway of my Beacon Hill brownstone wearing my cashmere robe, the one I'd splurged on at Barney's the year before it closed. Her hand rested on the brass knob like she'd been turning it her whole life. Behind her, through the gap in the door, I could hear my sister-in-law laughing at something on the television I'd had mounted over the fireplace 6 months ago. We had to change the deadbolt for safety, my mother said, still smiling. Go check into the Liberty. You can afford it, can't you? She closed the door in my face. I stood on Acorn Street with 2 suitcases, a laptop bag, and a duty-free tote from Geneva, locked out of the house I'd bought with 8 years of 70-hour weeks. Snow had started while I was in the cab from Logan. The dry, mean snow Boston gets in January. Somewhere down the cobblestones a dog barked. Before I tell you how I dismantled my entire family without ever raising my voice, without throwing a punch, breaking a window, or filing a single eviction, do me a favor. In the comments, tell me the worst thing a family member ever did to you in the name of love. I read every one of them. I checked into the Liberty Hotel 3 blocks away, which, yes, I could afford, but the symbolism wasn't lost on me. The Liberty is built inside what used to be the Charles Street Jail. They've kept the original cell bars downstairs as decor for the bar. I sat on a king bed at $480 a night, still in my wool coat, watching the snow blur the streetlights on Cambridge Street, and I tried to do the math on how I'd let this happen. It hadn't been an impulse. I knew that already. My mother didn't do impulses. She did portfolio decisions. In my family, there are 2 children, and we are not people. We are line items. There is my brother, the appreciating asset. Lacrosse captain, 4 years at Dartmouth, 8 more at Tufts Medical, cardiothoracic fellowship at Mass General. They put his picture on the family Christmas card for 15 straight years, even the years he wasn't doing anything new, because his bone structure was the closest thing my mother had to a religion. And then there's me, the depreciating asset, the one who never married the right boy from Greenwich, never moved back to Connecticut, never traded her spreadsheets for a baby. I'm a forensic accountant at a firm in the financial district. I read other people's lies for a living. I'd been one of 3 women under 35 made partner that year, and when I called my mother to tell her, she'd said, "That's nice, honey. Did your brother tell you Camille is pregnant with twins?" That was the year I learned what my role really was. 2 years ago, my father needed a hip replacement. He'd been letting his Medicare supplement lapse to fund my brother's first failed practice, a boutique cardiology storefront in Brookline that bled cash for 19 months before it folded. The hip was urgent. Leahy wanted $93,000 before they'd scheduled a surgery. He called me from the waiting room, voice cracking, and I wired it that afternoon. I drained a 6-month emergency fund and didn't sleep until the surgery cleared. Easter, I drove down for dinner. There was a brand new gay wagon in the driveway with a red ribbon tied to the side mirror, white with the AMG package. "Camille needs it for the babies," my mother said. Your brother didn't think a sedan was safe enough. I stood in the foyer of the house I grew up in and watched my father walk past me without looking up, the new titanium ball joint ticking faintly under his slacks. I asked very politely how they'd afforded a $180,000 German SUV 3 months after I'd paid for his bones. "Oh, sweetheart," my mother said, "your brother helped a little. He's doing very well." He wasn't doing well. He was bleeding out the second practice by then, the one in the South End with the marble countertops and the imported Italian chairs he'd financed with what later got called aggressive bookkeeping. He hadn't helped. He couldn't have helped. They'd taken the money I'd sent to keep my father walking and handed it to my sister-in-law so she'd be more comfortable on the drive to her OB appointments. That was the day I understood. I wasn't their daughter. I was a depreciating financial instrument they'd been holding for a long-term liquidation event, and the event had finally arrived. So when I landed at Logan after 3 weeks in Geneva and found my mother in my robe, I wasn't shocked. I was on schedule. They'd waited until I had a long enough work trip. They'd waited until the bond market closed for the weekend and my office wouldn't notice me missing. They'd waited until my sister-in-law was deep enough into the 3rd trimester that no judge in Suffolk County would put a pregnant woman in a snowstorm. They had weaponized her uterus the same way they'd weaponized my father's hip. I called my lawyer the next morning from the hotel. Her name is Ms. Munentis Calloway. She's a white-collar defense specialist who used to be in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of New York, and she charges $900 an hour for the privilege of watching her not blink. I told her what had happened. I told her I wanted the police, the National Guard, a SWAT team, somebody. She let me finish. Then she said, very quietly, "Honey, listen to me. We have a problem. It's my house. The deed is in my name only. That doesn't matter. Your housekeeper let them in?" She thought it was a family visit. They had a key from the spare I'd left at my parents'. "And how long have they been living there?" 21 days. Miss Calloway sighed. I'd never heard her sigh before. Massachusetts gives squatters' rights faster than most states, and the second a pregnant woman is involved in winter, you can forget about a same-day order. We are looking at 4 to 6 months in housing court at minimum, probably longer. They will frame this as a family dispute. The judge will tell you to mediate. They will tell you to put the pregnant woman up in a hotel. I sat down on the edge of the hotel bed. They want me to put her up. They want you to pay them to leave. That's the play. They've done their homework. Or somebody has. I closed my eyes. Somebody had. My brother had. The man who'd memorized every loophole in the Stark law to keep his clinic open another quarter. Of course he knew tenancy statutes. Of course he'd planned this on a yellow legal pad over scotch at our parents' kitchen counter. What are my options? I asked. You write a check or you wait. Those aren't options. They're the only ones the housing system gives you. I hung up and looked at the snow on Cambridge Street and felt something cold settle into the space behind my sternum. Not panic. Something colder than panic. A clarity. My brother had built this trap using the legal system. He'd assumed I would do what I'd always done. Pay, cry, eat the loss, send a card on Mother's Day. He'd assumed my conscience would be louder than my survival. But he'd forgotten what I did for a living. He'd forgotten that I'd spent 15 years reading the financial confessions of men exactly like him. Small kings with bad balance sheets who lied to bankers and bankruptcy trustees and the IRS and slept fine at night because they believed the rules were for people too dumb to find the seams. I knew the shape of his lies before he told them. I had been watching the shape of his lies my entire life. I wasn't going to fight him in housing court. I was going to feed him to a federal one. For 4 days, I went silent. I let my mother's calls go to voicemail. I muted my brother's group chat. I let my sister-in-law post Instagram stories from my kitchen. Captions like "finally home" and "baby's first Beacon Hill snowfall." And I didn't comment, didn't react, didn't even screenshot. I wanted them comfortable. I wanted them arrogant. I wanted them to believe I was doing what I had always done, folding. Then I went to work. I have access through my firm to public filings databases that most civilians don't know exist. I pulled my brother's bankruptcy petition from his second practice, the one that quietly went under 14 months ago. He'd filed Chapter 7 personal, not just business, and he'd sworn to a federal judge under oath on Form 106AB that he had less than $19,000 in total liquid assets. No savings, no investments, no undisclosed accounts. He'd walked away from $480,000 in business debt and the medical malpractice carrier had eaten the rest. That was filing 1. Filing 2 was newer. 3 months ago, an SBA-backed loan application had been submitted in my sister-in-law's name to fund a concierge cardiology and women's wellness clinic in the Back Bay. The application listed her as the principal applicant to keep my brother's bankruptcy off the credit report, and it had a personal financial statement attached. The statement claimed the household held $390,000 in liquid savings and a family-funded down payment of $200,000 more. In other words, at the same time my brother was telling a federal bankruptcy judge he was broke, he was telling a federal lender he had $600,000 in his pocket. He'd done what I'd watched white-collar idiots do for a decade. He'd lied in 2 different directions to 2 different agencies, and he hadn't checked whether those 2 agencies ever talked to each other. They do. I know the man at the SBA Office of Inspector General who they talked to. I'd built a case with him 3 years ago against a podiatrist in Worcester. He owed me a coffee. I bought him lunch instead. On the morning of day 5, I called my father. I used a burner I picked up at a CVS on Charles Street because I knew he'd avoid my number. He answered on the fourth ring, voice gummy with sleep at 10 in the morning on a Wednesday. Because of course the man with the new hip wasn't working anymore. He was retired on my paycheck. Daddy, I said. I let my voice go small. I let it crack. I borrowed the version of myself from when I was 11, the year I'd cried in his lap because Camille, my sister-in-law's middle school equivalent, a girl named Bridget, had told everyone I had a flat chest. I let that girl talk. Daddy, I can't do this anymore. I'm so tired. There was a pause, then a soft, satisfied exhale on the other end. The sound of a man feeling like he'd won. Sweetheart, it's about time. We're family. We shouldn't be fighting like this. You're right, I said. I want to make it right. I want to give you the house. Properly. So Camille can settle and the twins have a real home. That's a very mature decision, honey. But there's a tax problem. If I just gift it to you, the IRS treats it as a gift. The bill will be 6 figures. You'd have to sell to pay it. We can't sell. Camille needs that house. I know. So my attorney says we have to make it look like you funded the original purchase. We need a notarized affidavit saying the $200,000 down payment I made in 2019 was actually your savings, held informally. That makes it a return of capital, not a gift, and the IRS leaves it alone. I could hear him sit up in bed. What do I have to do? Just come to my attorney's office on Friday. You, Mom, and my brother. Sign a sworn statement that the down payment was always your money. The house transfers clean. Camille and the twins are safe. And what about you? I just want it to be done, Daddy. I want to walk away. He bought it. He bought all of it. Because in his head, I was still the 11-year-old in his lap, and 11-year-olds don't lay traps. He told me he talked to my brother. He told me Camille would be so relieved. He told me he loved me. He hadn't said that on a phone call in 6 years. I hung up and threw up in the hotel sink. Then I called Miss Calloway and told her to book the conference room. Friday at 2 o'clock, the offices of Calloway and Wren on the 38th floor of one financial center didn't look like a place where families came together. It looked like a place where men in good shirts came to learn their lives were over. Floor-to-ceiling glass, the harbor to the east, the spires of the Custom House and the Federal Reserve Bank to the south, a mahogany conference table polished to a mirror finish. A court reporter in the corner setting up her stenotype. A videographer adjusting a lens on a tripod aimed at 3 empty chairs. And next to me, 2 men in unremarkable charcoal suits who had not introduced themselves yet. One was from the SBA Office of Inspector General. The other was from IRS Criminal Investigation, Boston Field Office. Both were taking notes on legal pads. Both had been briefed and brought their badges and a duplicate of every document I'd pulled, certified by their respective agencies. I told my parents the building required this level of formality because my attorney specialized in high net worth transfers and the notarization standards were strict. It was a lie. The notarization standards in Massachusetts are about as strict as a parking ticket, but my parents had never been inside a building like this, and intimidation was the point. At 2:03, the elevator chimed. My family walked in like they were arriving at the Met Gala. My father wore the navy suit he'd been married in. My mother wore a fur sable vintage, which I recognized because I'd bought it at a Christie's estate auction 4 years before, and she'd borrowed it for a charity gala. She had never given it back. My sister-in-law waddled in last, 8 months pregnant with what was supposed to be a girl and a boy, in a powder pink maternity dress that probably cost more than my first car. She was holding a Starbucks venti and scanning the conference room ceiling like she was casing it for chandelier installation. My brother brought up the rear. 41 years old, 6'2", salt and pepper temples he'd been cultivating since he was 34. He looked at the harbor view, at the court reporter, at me, and I watched his eyes do the same arithmetic mine had done. This is a lot of theater for a family signing. I saw him hesitate. I saw him decide he was smarter than the room. Let's get this done, my father said, sitting before he was invited to. Camille needs to eat. Of course, Miss Calloway said. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone of the gravity of what we're about to sign. This is a sworn affidavit. The court reporter is transcribing. The video is for the official file. The statements you make today carry penalty of perjury weight under both Massachusetts and federal law. If any statement contradicts a previous federal filing, for example, a bankruptcy petition or a federal loan application, the consequences include felony charges. Do all of you understand? My mother nodded. My father waved a hand like he was shooing a fly. My sister-in-law said, sure. My brother said nothing. He was watching the two men in the corner. Doctor, he said to me. Not by my name, not even sis, just doctor. Which is what he'd called me sarcastically since I'd gotten my CPA. Who are they? Compliance observers, I said. It was technically true. The firm requires them at any transfer this size. He stared at me for 1 second too long. I held his eyes. He looked at our father, who looked at our mother, who looked at the harbor view because she'd never met a difficult question she couldn't outwait. Fine, he said. Let's sign. Ms. Calloway slid the affidavit across the table. It was 4 pages. The operative paragraph was on page 3. I, the undersigned, do hereby attest under penalty of perjury that I'd personally held in cash savings the sum of $200,000 between January 2018 and June 2019, which sum was provided to my daughter for the purpose of the down payment on the property at, and then my address. My father didn't read it. He never read anything. He uncapped a heavy black fountain pen, gave the camera a wink, like he was Frank Sinatra at the Sands, and signed. My mother signed next, hand steady, the diamond on her ring finger catching the lobby light. She signed with a flourish. My sister-in-law clapped, very softly, finally. My brother picked up the pen. He did not sign. He held the pen above the paper and read. He read carefully. I watched his eyes move down the page once, then again, then one more time. He looked up. He looked at me. He looked at the IRS agent in the corner who had not, throughout the entire meeting, set his pen down once. This says the $200,000 was personal cash savings of my parents from 2018 to 2019, he said. That's correct, Ms. Calloway said. My parents didn't have $200,000 in 2018. Then perhaps you shouldn't sign it, I said. The room got quiet in a way. Conference rooms only get quiet when somebody starts to realize. My mother looked up. My father set down the fountain pen. My sister-in-law took her hand off her belly for the first time in 20 minutes. What is this? My brother said. His voice had dropped half an octave. It's an affidavit, I said. It's what you wanted. It's what you and Dad worked out on a yellow pad last August, isn't it? Transfer the property, fix the tax exposure, settle Camille. I'm helping. I'm doing what you asked. Sis. He said it now. Sis. The pet name he'd been allergic to for 30 years. What is this? I nodded at Ms. Calloway. She opened a red accordion folder and laid 2 documents on the table on top of the affidavit my parents had just signed. One was a certified copy of his Chapter 7 bankruptcy petition from 14 months ago, his signature on Form 106A-B clearly visible, swearing to less than $19,000 in liquid assets. The other was the SBA loan application from 3 months ago, Camille's signature on the personal financial statement, swearing to $390,000 in liquid savings, and on the back, in his own handwriting under household contributions, a notation of $200,000 from family resources. He looked at the documents. He looked at our parents. He looked at the videographer, who had not moved a muscle, and the red light on the camera, which was still on. He understood. I watched my brother, the appreciating asset, Mass General Fellowship, $4,000 suits, go gray under the recessed lights. You can't be rich for the SBA and broke for the bankruptcy trustee at the same time, I said. Pick one. Whichever one you pick, the other one is a felony. And both of them are federal. Sweetheart, my mother said, and I almost laughed at how fast she pivoted back to the diminutive. Sweetheart, we can fix this. We don't have to file anything. We can. Mom, I said, you just swore on video that the down payment was your cash. Either Daddy committed Medicare fraud by hiding that money during his disability claim, or you committed bank fraud last month when you co-signed Camille's HELOC and listed your assets as zero, or my brother committed bankruptcy fraud last year, or all three. The two men in the corner work for the agencies you defrauded. Say hello. The SBA agent lifted his badge. So did the IRS agent. Neither of them said a word. My sister-in-law made a sound I had never heard a human being make before. Half scream, half cough. Her Starbucks cup tipped over. Caramel macchiato spread across the polished mahogany like a slow brown blood stain. You set us up, my brother whispered. No, I said. I gave you a piece of paper. You filled it out. You signed it. I didn't put words in your mouth. I didn't put numbers in your application. You did. I just made sure there was a witness this time. He stood up so fast his chair tipped. He moved toward me, not far, 2 steps. And then he stopped because the SBA agent had also stood up, and the SBA agent's right hand was resting very calmly on his belt where his sidearm was. Sit down, doctor, Miss Calloway said. The camera is still recording. Every movement you make is admissible. He sat. He sat the way a man sits when his knees stop working. My duty as an officer of the court, Ms. Calloway continued, is to report evidence of federal crimes. Within the hour, I will electronically file the affidavit, this video, and certified copies of the related federal filings with the United States Bankruptcy Trustee for the District of Massachusetts, the SBA Office of Inspector General, and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. The 2 gentlemen behind me are present to take custody of the originals immediately. You should also know, she said, looking at my brother now, that this is a parallel proceeding. Your medical license is regulated by the Massachusetts Board of Registration in Medicine, which suspends pending federal indictment for fraud. You will not be performing any more surgeries this year, possibly any year. My sister-in-law began to cry. Not pretty crying. The kind where the makeup goes. My father stared at the table. His lips moved. He was trying to count, I think, but there was nothing left to count. He had signed a number that did not exist. He had pledged a savings account that had never been opened. He had told 3 different federal agencies 3 different stories about the same dollar, and that dollar was now sitting on a videotape in a glass tower 40 floors above the harbor. My mother was the only one who looked at me. She looked at me the way she had looked at me my entire life. Like I was a column on a spreadsheet she'd been trying to balance against my brother's column, and the columns were finally irreparably off. How could you do this to your family, she said. You didn't do this to family, Mom, I said. You did this to me. I'm just the only one who knew where the bodies were buried, because you spent 35 years teaching me how to count. I stood. I picked up my bag. The 2 federal agents began collecting the documents. The court reporter was still typing, calmly, as if she were transcribing a deposition about a bicycle accident. At the door, I turned around. I don't know why. Maybe because my mother had been my mother once, before she was a portfolio manager. Maybe because my father had taught me to ride a bike on a cul-de-sac in Connecticut and had cried at my college graduation. Maybe because my brother, before he was a surgeon, had been a kid who taught me to skip stones at a lake in New Hampshire when I was 6. There are state troopers at the Brownstone now, I said. Boston PD is meeting them. They're not arresting you yet. They're escorting my sister-in-law out of my home. Her tenancy claim died the second the deed transfer fraud was documented. She has 20 minutes to pack what she brought in. After that, every key, every garage opener, and every fob she has is going into a Ziploc bag with a chain of custody label. The twins, my mother whispered, will be born in a hospital, Mom. Probably the one she's about to be charged with defrauding. Her mother lives in Sudbury. She has a guest room. I closed the door behind me. The aftermath came fast. Federal investigations usually feel slow on the news because the news only catches the bookends. But inside one, when you've handed them a gift-wrapped confession, they move in days. By Monday morning, the U.S. bankruptcy trustee had filed a motion to revoke my brother's discharge. By Tuesday, The SBA had frozen the clinic loan and referred the application for criminal prosecution. By Wednesday, my mother and father were named as material witnesses in two parallel federal investigations and had retained the cheapest defense attorney in Hartford, who I happened to know because I'd put one of his clients away in 2019. My brother was indicted 6 weeks later on 3 counts of bank fraud, 2 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of bankruptcy fraud, and 1 count of making false statements to a federal agent. The U.S. Attorney's Office offered him a deal that took the wire fraud off the table in exchange for a guilty plea on the other 6. He took it. He served 7 years at Devon's, a low-security federal prison about 50 minutes west of the city he used to operate in. The Massachusetts board pulled his medical license permanently before his first night in custody. My parents pled out on the perjury and conspiracy counts. They didn't do federal time. They got 3 years probation, $112,000 in fines, and a lien against the house in Greenwich for restitution. They sold the G-Wagon the first month. My father went back to driving a 2008 Buick. My sister-in-law was never charged. The U.S. meter race attorney decided a third trimester defendant was bad publicity. The twins were born at Mass General, a boy and a girl. Both healthy, and her mother in Sudbury did, in fact, take them in. I have never met them. I will never meet them. They have my brother's last name and his eyes, and that is enough information for the rest of my life. I sold the Brownstone on Acorn Street that spring. I couldn't sleep in it anymore. The hallway still smelled like my mother's perfume the day I moved out, and every time I opened the kitchen door, I expected to see my sister-in-law's feet on the coffee table. After commissions, capital gains, and a charitable donation to a domestic financial abuse shelter in Dorchester that took half the proceeds, I cleared $2.1 million, wired it to a Singapore branch of a private bank I'd done forensic work for in 2021, and bought a one-way ticket out of Logan. I sit now in a cafe off Bukit Pasoh, 3 blocks from the office of my new firm. The harbor outside the window is full of container ships instead of fishing boats. The coffee is better. The accent I hear most often when I sit down is somebody else's. My phone has a new number. My socials are deleted. My family has no way to reach me. To them I am a ghost who balanced the books. People love to tell you to take the high road. They say it like the high road has a fast lane. It doesn't. The high road, when your family is a syndicate, is a 4-month housing case, followed by a 5-year civil suit, followed by a lifetime of holiday cards from prison. The high road is how parasites stay alive. What I did wasn't the high road. It wasn't the low road either. It was the only road. It was the road my brother would have taken if it had been him in my shoes, except he would have done it badly and gotten caught, and someone like me would have been hired to read his confession in a glass tower 40 floors above a harbor he'd never see again. If you've ever stood on a doorstep in the snow with your own key in your hand and somebody else's voice on the other side of the door, if you've ever paid for the surgery and watched somebody else drive the car, if you've ever counted the cost of your own family and realized the number was always going to be everything you had, then you already know the choice I made. You've already made it in your head 100 times. The only difference between us is that I picked up the pen. Hit subscribe if you would have too. And tell me in the comments, would you have signed or would you have hesitated?